size of the unit as well.
And if we could get a general idea of what size that we're looking at and the impact, because there are two things that are kind of going on, and one is the flow-on effect onto the street. But then there will come a point where in certain parts of the city there is only so much that you can absorb really by way of transport, accommodating 2, 3, 4 parking spaces for one unit, which is what's happening in Auckland.
Assuming the same level of car ownership there is a trend amongst teenagers now not to buy cars. So are we? You
mean we're returning to the old trend where teenagers couldn't afford to buy cars?
So because of the seeing it as a liability rather than an asset. So are we sort of extrapolating based on current or the last 2 or 3 years of changed behaviour?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons for going down to just one per house, because at the moment across the city there's, I think it's about 1.7 cars per house on average. So it's less than 2. That's why we thought 2 was probably a bit too onerous for some houses. So moving down to 1 is pointing it back in that direction, that there is a trend to reduce car ownership overall.
And if I can add to that, of course, medium density has been proposed around KAC, so there's more ready access to public transport.
Yeah. Phil?
In a lot of suburbs over the last, say, 15 years, the streets have been narrowed, as you know, and like Addington is an example, and where there's not enough room for cars to park on one property, they'll park on the berm, that kind of thing, and then the streets are quite crowded with cars everywhere. So is that two-tier approach going to help address that, especially, for example, when there's new developments in some of those older streets in Addington, like brownfields?
Well, if there's larger houses, yes, obviously they'll need to provide 2 with the two-tier approach. And I think a lot of the issues around Addington is a lot to do with the commercial development around there as well, and the overspill from the development. And just sort of supposed to pick up related to that on the Hazeldean development. From what I understand, the reason why that car park was demolished, and we can clarify this, but was because it was earthquake damaged. From what I drove past there the other day, it's been rebuilt now. So I think it was a temporary earthquake damage issue rather than an actual change to the parking arrangements long term.
I mean, I just wondered whether we've thought all of this through, because you just triggered my mind over the use of that phrase, key activity centre, and when you're thinking about our desire to get, sort of off-street cycleways and bus priority lanes, then increased on-street parking is anathema to that. So there's just so much to work through, isn't there? There are multiple uses, particularly in those main areas, and maybe we need to be thinking about those important arterial roads in terms of public transport and cycling, and maybe even cycling off those arterials, but alongside or adjacent to.
That's why we haven't removed the minimum parking requirements in district centres. We've only removed them from the local and neighbourhood centres because it's likely that those district centres is going to be where the public transport priorities needed to be, and maybe separated cycle lanes. So we've recognised that there is a real tension in those large areas. So it's only the smaller local and neighbourhood centres where we've removed the minimums. So.
Okay. So we'll come back to that, but with a little bit more information, we'll make a decision on which one we notify. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next issue. Yes. Is that right?
Yep.
So next slide, please, Linda. So the next issue was around the integrated transport assessments, and we once again had sort of quite polarised
views on that. Can you direct us to a page?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. So page 14.
Cool.
So just as a bit of history, in the current city plan we have a rule called the high traffic generator rule, which means any development that generates more than 250 vehicle movements a day needs to apply for a consent, and that's a process where we can look at whether the development is going to cause adverse effects on the transport network, and we can take into account things like safety and ensuring that the access is adequate. So that's in the current city plan. We've since obviously this current city plan was written in the last year or so, the regional council through the regional policy statement now requires all district and city councils in Canterbury to require integrated transport assessments for substantial developments. And an integrated transport assessment is a process which originated from the UK, but it's now been used quite widely in Auckland and Tauranga and Hamilton and Queenstown, from what I understand, and it is sort of growing in use across the country to ensure that large developments cater not just for traffic, but they also cater for all modes. So some of the concerns that were raised by some submitters around ensuring that there's good pedestrian access into supermarkets and through car parks and into shopping malls, and good cycle access and good public transport access, and also obviously good safe car parks and access for cars as well, can all be considered under an integrated transport assessment. So it's a much more multimodal assessment than what previously we had under the current city plan. And so what we're suggesting and what we put out in the proposed plan for consultation was that we require that these high traffic generating activities, so these activities that generate 250 vehicle movements a day, provide these integrated transport assessments, so we can assess whether they are providing for all modes and also in a safe and an efficient way, so it doesn't cause issues on the transport network and doesn't cause safety issues. For clarity and for certainty, we've because it's always been a bit hard to work out what activity generates 250 vehicle movements a day, we've translated that figure into these thresholds that are in the box at the top of page 14, which shows some examples of some common activities and the kind of size of those developments that would need an integrated transport assessment. So this has been seen as best practice to do integrated transport assessments by the New Zealand Transport Agency, and so we've had some support from the CJOB and from the CAG members to have integrated transport assessments, but we've also had a number of comments from some property owners and from some sort of property groups saying that they think this is too onerous and that they would like to either see this completely removed or their activity, their own business exempt from this requirement, or have these thresholds raised so that they don't have to go through a consent process.
Can you just run through what an integrated traffic transport assessment does? Sure.
Probably I can refer to right at the end. So page 84 and 85, the appendix, which has a checklist of the kind of things that we would require a development to provide details on, so it can be assessed as to whether they are providing for all modes. So the kind of things that we would require would be obviously an explanation of the kind of activity that they're proposing, how accessible it is for all modes, whether you're walking or cycling or by public transport or car, how much parking you're providing, and then sort of an assessment of the effects of that, and any maybe mitigation measures.
So why would anyone object to doing this? I mean, that's what I can't understand. Here's a plan that makes sense. Well,
I mean, I've heard people say it blows out development services too.
Well, how much does it cost to do an integrated transport assessment?
I think one of the key things to note with what's been proposed in the transport chapter is there's a basic integrated transport assessment, which is something which is not going to be expensive and shouldn't require any modelling or anything like that. And then there's the full ITA, which is really for those significant projects where you do have to do quite a bit of work. So I think at the basic level, the cost shouldn't be huge, and it's definitely best practice. And what it looks at is not just vehicles, looks at your PT access, looks at how people can cycle there, walk there, and everything else. But certainly for those significant developments, there is going to be a bit of work required. And as soon as you engage traffic engineers, the cost does get up. They don't come cheap.
But why don't we do it for people? I mean, it seems to me that it's a public good that this work is done. And I mean, I know that you can force a developer or I mean, some of these are quite small developments. Yeah. So, but I would have thought, yeah, so more than 23 residential units will spark an integrated traffic assessment at this level, transport assessment.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering why is it a private benefit? It's a public good, surely, that we have an integrated transport. I mean, at the moment, I know that we're writing them in, and obviously they haven't worked before because that's why we get traffic light after traffic light after traffic light instead of an integrated transport solution. Isn't it the city? Isn't that why we exist, to do this work?
Yeah, we're definitely going to help assist the developments to ensure that they we help them as much as we can. We're going to put out guidelines to explain quite clearly what we expect. The reason why we need to go through...
We hire very good traffic engineers. We've got excellent traffic engineers.
Yeah, so the reason why we need to, and we will use those, but the only way we can use those traffic engineer expertise that we have is we need it to go through a consent process, because otherwise, if there's no trigger that you need to go through a consent, then council won't be informed of the development and the development will just go ahead. So until there's some trigger that, yes, you're going to put in a new supermarket or something, we need to have a trigger in the plan so that we can get our traffic engineers to have a look at this development and work with the developer to ensure that there's no effects. But without a trigger, there's no way we can intervene.
Okay, well, I've got Tim, then Vicky, then Paul.
So my only concern with this would be if it was made easy with regards to those residential roads, those smaller streets where, say, daycare had been proposed, and that's the real issue. I mean, we've got one in Chumley Ave, I think, and there's a couple of others around, and I've sat on a couple of hearings with regards to them. So I think for those areas, it's really important that those residents have a very good and robust system to protect the kind of the areas that they're living in. So they're not suddenly going to be inundated with cars parked and travelling 24/7 or whatever it is. So there is a reason for it, and it's very important, I think.
Vicky?
It seems to me that by putting this as a requirement for any block of more than 23 residential units, we've effectively unlooped the loop. And that what we are seeking to do is to intensify development through all sorts of design-led mechanisms, but suddenly having to do an integrated traffic management and pretend that you have any clue about what the people coming into that unit, which is not sold or let to anyone at that point, is going to use as their mode of transport, is just fantasy. So I absolutely cannot see. 23 is, for example, more than the exemplars that the Housing New Zealand are doing there too. It will be less than most of the council social housing needs to do to redevelop any block. It will be less than practically every private sector development for affordable housing, and it's based on nothing. We have no clue the mode of transport of the people coming into those units. So all we would be doing is making up data, because there is none, and delaying the whole building of those houses. So I am totally opposed to such a low threshold for residential activity. And if it was maybe 200 or 400 or 600 or something, I could understand it. But 23 is actually quite a modest development. So I cannot see the point of it.
Perhaps, Councillor, one of the things that the ITA does is if we just went with a standard parking requirement, then exactly those social housing, if we had the two parks per unit, then...
That already will not be more than 140 square metres. Like the previous rule just obliterated anything of that size if it goes ahead. Sorry.
Yes, you did. So one of the reasons, the advantage of the ITA is if we're stuck with a standard of 2 car parks per unit, say for the social housing, then that requires those people to come and ask for us to do a dispensation from the car parking. What the ITA does is exactly the social housing people can come and say, we don't need all that car parking because we're this type of development. This is exactly what it provides that opportunity for.
But it won't, because the houses won't be more than 150 square metres. If there is a requirement to have 2 car parks for 150
But you may not even require one.
yeah, but they definitely won't go to 2 because that will be the cut-off point. Nobody will look at it.
Correct. So what I was trying to say, there are some advantages for reducing the amount of car parking or reducing things, which is difficult to get under the current plan.
So can you tell me the sort of delay that it will involve?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think one of the key things for the 23, that's at the basic level of ITA that I referred to before, so that the requirements for that are not particularly onerous. It goes way higher. I think it's 90 odd for 92 for the full integrated transport assessment. So in terms of slowing down development, really your concerns about that, it's not going to be a really detailed assessment that we require at the 23 level, but it will provide some good information as to what the likely effects of that development will be, and that will help council as the consent authority to, consider whether those effects have been avoided, remedied or mitigated.
Has there been any feedback from
They would be attached to the...
It would be in the CJOG comments. I can't recall specifically.
There is MV. Well, there's Housing New Zealand Corporation.
Certainly there's generally support from the CJOG for the whole ITA approach, because that's seen as best practice, and NZTA have even written a guideline on them and given direction as to what should and shouldn't be in them. So we've followed that and...
Can I just point out the difference between 600 FTE students, which might be 3,000 or 3,600 students, if they're coming in for a specific course, which is not a full-time course, and 92 residential units, and we put them on the same threshold? There's a radical difference in impact and traffic. Made up of 5, 6, 8 part-time students.
Paul and then Glenn.
My concern is around the residential areas where new activities take place, where it does actually cause major congestion of roads, and we've seen it actually up towards the airport with the introduction of a lot of commercial businesses moving out there, the impact it has on the streets. And I'd be concerned to see that a developer is actually putting that charge back onto the ratepayer. I think the modelling is about right. Maybe it's just how that charge is put together, but I think the developers do have to provide us with a surety that their development's not going to destroy the residential amenity.
Glenn?
Thank you. Yes, yeah. How much will this add to each unit in terms of costs? You talked before about the basic and then the full costings.
It would depend on the size of the development. I mean, for a basic, all we're really asking is just a series of questions, and for developers to tell us what they're proposing, what kind of facilities they're proposing for their residents or for their employees. Are they providing more cycle parks, which may mean there will be more people cycling, or is it just down the road from a bus stop, or is there some local shops around the corner, so that the development won't be as reliant on cars as compared to a development that was further away. So by them telling us the type of development and the location of the development, we'll be able to help them to ascertain the approximate number of people that would be covered by those different modes. So it's really just them answering a whole lot of questions, so we can help ensure that this development will not cause adverse effects, and they can also have a look and see what things that they can do to mitigate the adverse effects. So we're really not trying to impose more development costs. We're really just trying to find out more information about what they're proposing, so that we can ensure that we can both work together to ensure the effects are minimised. That's the...
But how discretionary is that? If they have something and you don't like it, like how long does that been delayed?
So if it's a non-notified resource consent, the resource consent must be processed within 20 working days. That's the statutory time frame that is under the Resource Management Act. And we are meeting that time frame on most of our consents, and most of these are non-notified at the moment. We've had over 300 consents go through this process over the last 5 years.
So this process will not delay the resource consent beyond 20 working days?
If it's non-notified, it must be processed within 20 working days. If it is a significant development or there is significant effects and it's deemed that it needs to be notified so that the community can have input into it, then there is a notified process. But majority of consents go through on a non-notified process, so it would be 20 working days.